Hey, and welcome to Be the Bridge. I'm your host, Brian Peyton Joyner. From the time I was 11, I tried to pray away the gay. But my senior year in college, I realized I could pray and be gay. Each week, I'll share my experiences and chat with others as we build a bridge between the LGBT community and people of faith. Thanks for joining, and let the construction begin. Hello, fellow bridge builders. Thank you all for joining me today for this 25th episode of Be the Bridge podcast. I'm your host, Brian Peyton Joyner, author of the novel The Wisdom of Stones. The novel's about Ben, a college senior, who promised God and his Meemaw he'd be a Southern Baptist preacher, but he can't pray away the gay. My guest is someone who tried to change his sexual orientation. In therapists' offices and at conferences, Kevin Garcia was told that if he prayed hard enough, if he fasted enough, if he went through a ton of inner healing, God would make him straight. Well, not surprisingly, the gay conversion therapy didn't do anything to change his attractions. And as you might expect, it did cause significant emotional and spiritual damage. Kevin went through some dark years, contemplating suicide on a regular basis. But after attending a Reformation Project's regional training conference in Atlanta, Kevin reclaimed his Christian faith. Although he calls himself a hot mess, he is my role model for content generation. He writes blogs and articles and books. He hosts and produces a weekly podcast, and he creates these amazing videos that are educational and moving that really showcase his unique personality and style. And on top of all that, he's about to start seminary. The Kevin Garcia, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much. And also, I'm just like, wow, I didn't know all these things about myself.
So let me ask you the question I like to ask all my guests. Where are you from? Where were you born and raised?
Well, I grew up in kind of the boonies of Tennessee. There was Clarksville, which is close to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. We lived out near Montgomery County, and we had 4.5 acres of land. We grew up in the country in suburbia, and it was pretty idyllic for a child. My father was military, and there was a tight military community around us.
Did you move around a lot as a result of his being in the military, or no?
Oddly enough, no. We only moved once for his posting. His posting changed to Fort Eustis, just based on his work. So we moved up to Virginia, in Williamsburg, Virginia, home of the historic Triangle and the College of William and Mary and all that stuff. We moved to Virginia when I was going into the 8th grade. I was kind of a weirdo, to be honest. I mean, my awkward phase lasted from probably 5th grade all the way, depending on how you look at my college years, maybe the middle of my college years.
So what manifested itself in 5th grade where you felt awkward? What were you doing?
Oh my God, you can look at pictures and just kind of see it. You have the kids who kind of grow into the athletes and the cool kids. This is also the same time, around 6th grade is when it hit, because I was already kind of a husky kid and wasn't athletic.
I was there.
Yo, it's real. I was in choir. I was in the citywide children's choir, and then I was in regional choir, and then when I was in high school, I was in the chamber choir, the state choir, the whole 9 yards. It was just an interesting time to figure out what music was going to be for me, because it wasn't what everybody else was doing, especially out in the country.
When did you first realize that you were attracted to other boys?
I remember it specifically. It was first day of high school. It was Miss Triantopoulos' Art Foundations class, and I remember noticing a guy for the first time, and not just noticing, I was oh, he seems interesting, but noticing and feeling a stirring, if you will. And I immediately thought, oh shit, I think I'm attracted to him. And it sent me into the whole tailspin of, I'm a Christian, I shouldn't be dealing with this, I haven't done anything wrong, why is this happening? And I felt like it was something happening to me. And I also thought on some level I chose it, because that's what I was told my entire life, that the homosexuals choose to rebel against God.
So what was your religious upbringing?
We were part of a non-denominational evangelical church growing up, pretty close to Southern Baptist theology. My uncle was the pastor. My mother was the worship leader. I gave my life to Jesus at age 9 at a Jesus camp in the backwoods of Tennessee. I can still remember it pretty vividly, having what I believe was like a feeling of the Holy Spirit just like welling up inside of me and being filled up with the love of God. So like I still count that as like 9 years old as like my religious conversion, if you will.
So what was the driving force at that point that made you want to be saved?
Even as a young child, I never really felt like I had a place. I always felt just kind of like a little bit of a weirdo, kind of like an outsider. And then the way they presented the gospel at this camp was Jesus, when he was choosing his disciples, chose the people who didn't make the cut. Like, he chose the people who didn't make it into the priesthood. He chose the people who were the workers and like the people who were the rejects and the hotheads and the tax collectors and the weirdos. And it just kind of hit me like, oh, like this is like, if they could do it, if this ragtag group of teenagers who did not make it could do this, then I could do this. Like I could be somebody. And I also like, that was like at that moment, I also knew like, I want to tell people about Jesus for the rest of my life.
So in that evangelical church, do you remember your pastor? Do you remember lessons about homosexuality? Was that something that was taught a lot?
From my childhood, where my uncle was the pastor, I don't remember a whole lot of conversations surrounding gay people or homosexuality in general. It was more just being in the South, being in like, whether you liked it or not, you were in evangelical Bible Belt world. Just the things I was hearing from at school, from other people, these little whispers of things. It didn't even cross my mind that there was actual gay people in the world. They were like a myth to me.
Wow.
until I got to maybe 8th grade, and I met some friends and they identified as bisexual. And then we got to high school and there was like an openly gay male cheerleader, and it's like, oh, gay people exist too. And so that kind of helped me like figure out some language around it. But I was also like, it was well known that I was a Christian and I was super involved with my church. So Lord knows I wasn't telling a whole lot of people.
Did anyone ever accuse you of being gay or call you the F word or something like that?
Oh,
when you were
from the time I was in 5th grade all the way through like the middle of high school. And I also think like it was really weird for me because I think I was kind of a late bloomer. Like I wasn't really attracted to anyone until my freshman year of high school. I remark sometimes that I felt like people could see it before I did.
Wow. So with regard to art class boy, what happened after you felt that attraction?
I was super afraid, and I started praying a lot that God would take it from me and that the thorn in my flesh would be removed,
right,
so to speak.
The language we've been given is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a whole, and I honestly think most of my friends now come from that kind of background, so we can joke about it.
Right, right.
But what happened after that, I had made a couple of girlfriends in high school who I had come out to. And like the first person I'd come out to was my best friend, Kelsey. She was totally cool with it. She was super supportive. She really helped me, love myself. And then I had a couple other best friends so it was kind of like I started living this like in like freshman year, started living a double life where like in front of my friends, I was this one person. And then at home and at church, I was a totally different person.
Was Kelsey religious?
Yeah, in a way, like everybody in town pretty much went to the same megachurch, besides me and my family. So it was like most of the people at my high school went to like one of a handful of churches that were all kind of in the same vein. So it was like nominally Christian and religious, but I don't think any of us had a grasp on what good Christianity would be like.
Did you tell your parents at some point?
My sophomore year of high school, my father and I got into this fight where I was in the theater and I was in plays and I was thinking about going to college to study theater. Classic homosexual. We got into this fight. I don't know why he was so angry that day. But later on that afternoon, he came up to my room and apologized for yelling the way that he did. And it was the only time in his life that he ever apologized in my memory. Then he started asking me line questioning me. It's just like, are you having problems at school? And I'm like, no. Are people picking on you? And I said, no. It's like, are you having a problem with drugs? And I'm just like, where is he going with this? And then he said, are you having a problem with sex? I got real quiet and I was like, well, kind of. I wasn't having sex with anyone. Like I was a freshman in high school. No shade to anyone who does. Like that's their thing. But then he said, Kevin, are you gay? And then I answered in turn, kinda.
Yeah.
So, I'm kind of gay, Dad.
How did he respond to that?
I was so ashamed. I didn't even look at him when I told him. When I said that, I just started crying because I was convinced that this was it. I'm getting kicked out of the house. Like,
Oh my gosh.
my life is over. And my dad said, it's okay. You're going to be fine. We're going to be okay. He also told me that he thought that it was probably just a phase.
Right. That's sort of classic.
He said, maybe this is just a phase. And I'm just like, I don't know. Like this, and this is sophomore year of high school now. So I've been living with this secret for over a year that had just been like tearing at me. And my mother, he told my mother against my better judgment because I knew that she would lose her shit. She went to the Christian bookstore, found the one book on the shelf about homosexuality, didn't even read it, but found like this like hotline you can call, and it was to Exodus International, who then connected us with like a local like quote unquote therapy office. And so I was in reparative therapy the next week, and I bought in.
Did your mom tell your uncle about that?
No, my mom didn't tell anybody.
Okay.
That was the thing about my family. Coming from a military family, we knew about secrets and what secrets we had to keep. And
okay.
We were very much about keeping up appearances. And so at that point in our family's life, secrets were everything. And so we didn't tell a soul. And I was told that I shouldn't tell anybody else at school.
What about your...
So I felt...
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I felt real shitty. I felt super sad, but I was also willing to do anything to not lose my family. My mother said to me, like, if I have to choose between God and you know who I'm going to pick.
Wow.
And it was like the most heartbreaking thing I'd heard in my entire life.
So what about siblings? How many siblings do you have?
I am the third of 4 sons.
Oh, wow.
Like looking back on my life, like when I came out to them, like more recently, like 2 years ago, none of them were surprised really.
Right.
They've all been incredibly supportive now. I think back then, who can say how they would have reacted? Mm-hmm. It was pretty obvious. I was a fairly effeminate high schooler.
At the time, did your parents tell your siblings at all, or it was just you can't even tell anybody?
I don't think they did, because they didn't, like when I came out to them the second time, they didn't say that mom and dad told them when I was younger or anything like that. So I don't believe that they did. And so when I was going on these mysterious like trips to Richmond,
yeah,
I don't know what they told them. Like, I would have to be taken out of school to go to this. It was so weird.
What were those trips to Richmond like? What was it sitting down with the therapist? Put us in that situation so people can better understand that.
Well, let's put therapist in air quotes real quick, because technically the person who I sat across from was not a licensed therapist at all.
Right.
They were someone who is a biblical counselor, quote unquote. We went to this building and went into this office, sat across from a very kind woman who just asked me about my experience. And so I told her that I had an attraction to boys and that I know that it was sinful and I didn't know what to do about it. And what is interesting is that as I sat in this room, she told me, Kevin, you did not choose your sexual orientation. That's when she started introducing kind of like reparative therapy theology, if you will, that at some point in your life, you had a broken relationship with your dad and that's what made you gay. That was the explanation, that my feelings of wanting to connect romantically with another man were because I did not feel that I possessed any sort of masculinity. So I was reaching out to fill a legitimate need with an illegitimate means. And so that's how I was told. And that's like got pounded into me. And then I also went to conferences where I listened to psychologists and people who had studied this and really got all of like the theology and bad psychology like in tapes. And those were during my spongy years where I could remember anything just if I heard it one time.
Right. Were your parents sitting with you during the therapy sessions?
No, I was in the room by myself.
What did they think about your attractions to guys? Did they think it was a choice, or did they think there was something else at play?
I don't think they thought of it as a choice, but they did see it as something that could be changed with prayer, fasting, like doing the right thing. It's like, if this is the problem and these people who have dealt with this before know how to fix Kevin, we're going to fix Kevin. They would just always say, we're going to beat this. Like, we can beat this. And they would often like check in with me, like, so how are you feeling? And eventually I just told them like, yeah, I don't really have these attractions. I think it was just a phase, when in reality, that was not the case. I was just lying because I didn't want to like be questioned more about it.
Right. I certainly prayed hard so that God would make me straight, but fasting was not something that was in my faith tradition.
Mm-hmm.
What was fasting like? What did that mean?
The fasting portion didn't really come until my college years.
Okay.
I went through this moment in college. My dad decided that he no longer wanted to be married to my mother, and so he began the divorce process with her. And I just lost my shit. And I kind of went into like stereotypical college rebel mode where I drank and I smoked and I partied and I did whatever the hell I wanted to. And I also met my first boyfriend through that experience, and did a bunch of unhealthy things. So it was probably about like a year and a half. It was like my junior year of college. I realized that I had a painkiller addiction. That sucks. I was abusing alcohol to like an incredible degree. I was starting to have panic attacks. And so I said, okay, I need to change my life. Otherwise, I'm probably going to end up dead. And so I started therapy my junior year of college. I also joined a fraternity at the same time because that makes sense.
Right.
And
if you have a drinking problem, definitely join a fraternity. That's the classic first step of AA, right?
Absolutely. I desperately wanted to belong somewhere, and I love my fraternity and to this day, I'm a proud brother of Sigma Phi Epsilon.
Wow.
Because it was in SIGEP, they taught me that there's no wrong way to be a dude.
Wow.
There's no wrong way to be a man. And it just really and I didn't learn that in church. And funny enough, being in this fraternity, I was learning all of these principles about how to be a good man, how to be an honorable person. And I started going to a church that taught something very different. And so I was trying really hard to live in between these two worlds. At this church, which was a lot more Pentecostal leaning than my upbringing,
okay,
fasting was a normal part of that church's life. And so that's how I got introduced to fasting. And as I was trying to get right with God and also put on this front that I'm like a frat star, mm-hmm. I kind of began fasting intermittently. If there was ever a period where I was feeling particularly gay, I'd start fasting. And I'd go for 3 days. Here and there.
Without eating solid food, or what? Would you eat anything during that time? Like shakes?
No, just not eating for 3 days at a time. I didn't tell many people about it because of that.
Oh my gosh.
That verse I think it's the verse in Matthew 6 that says when you're fasting, don't tell people about it. Wash your face, put oil on your head so that people can just think you're doing normal stuff. So I never told anybody I was fasting, but that's what I was doing. And so anytime I felt hunger, I would just pray.
Huh.
May the hunger that I feel in my body be the hunger I feel for the presence of God. Real pious shit.
So in that church, was this what was encouraged? Was just fast as long as you need to? Were there no sort of parameters around what would be healthy or advisable?
Yeah, they were as pragmatic as they could be. They said just if you physically can't fast, don't fast. Fast from other things, fast from social media, fast from sugary things, fast from things that aren't great for you.
Because I have a friend who's Mormon and she fasts and they just do a day, but 3 days just seems a lot.
As a church, we would do a 21-day fast at the beginning of every year.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, which sounds a little extreme, but people would always do different kinds of things. So some of people were doing food, some people were doing social media, and people would also join in at different points. If you didn't feel you could do the full 21 days, they would join in at, 14 days, 7 days, 3 days. So it was not they shamed people into do it. As somebody who deeply wanted to be a very religious person and wanted to be holy, I'm just okay, if holiness looks like fasting, if fasting can help me with my homosexual proclivities, then I'm going to do whatever it takes to be close to God.
Now, was there ever a moment where you did feel like something had happened, like you had lost those attractions and you were straight? Because I had that happen in my life where there was a point where I really thought that I had been, quote unquote, cured. Mm-hmm. But that sort of lasted a couple months. And then spring came around and all the hot guys were running outside with their shirts off. And I realized...
Yo, let me tell you what. There's been more car wrecks caused by college cross-country teams than I'd care to admit. Whew. Lord, you are the molder of the clay. Hallelujah. Yeah, there were some periods in my journey where I thought, I wouldn't say that I had become straight, at least in college. I felt for a time, I thought that for a while, that I just become asexual. Like I didn't have attractions towards anybody. And of course, like kind of like you just described, like it would last just for like a few months. And I also went through this period of anytime I felt attracted towards a guy, I would think like, I feel attracted towards him. That means I'm objectifying him, which means like if I can make him not an object anymore, those attractions will go away. And so I would actually make friends with every single hot guy that I met in an effort to mitigate my attractions towards them.
How did that work out?
You know, not as well as I'd hoped. Because in some of the relationships that I formed with them, like even though they were friendships, they became very intimate friendships, and it almost came like a little bit of codependency, where I wanted to be around them all the time. They're my best bud. They're my best friend. It became unhealthy in some of those relationships. And so then I would just like go into like full rejection mode and just like kind of like ghost them for all intents and purposes. I think like within my fraternity, it was a little bit easier to do that because I had a bunch of different guys I could go to for that. So like if I wasn't hanging out with one person, I could always like move on to like this different sub social group within the fraternity.
So did your fraternity brothers know that you were gay?
Yeah, when I came in, they knew that I was, because like I was kind of like half in, half out of the closet on campus. I wouldn't call myself like an out and proud person, but like it was pretty well known that I had been seeing guys, and me being gay is like grass is green, sky is blue, Kevin's gay. It's that obvious. So I also found out like later on that like I almost didn't get in because of that. Like there were some guys who didn't want a gay guy in the fraternity, or like someone who was as effeminate as I was.
When did you find that out? While you were still at school or after you graduated?
Yeah, I found that out at school, and it was actually one of my brothers. His name is Mark Harlan. We had this ceremony where we send the seniors off. You get to stand in a circle. You get to say whatever you want to anybody. And he looked me in the face and said, I didn't vote for you to come into SIGEP because I thought you were going to be bad for us. And I was completely wrong. On the one hand, even though like I was like not an out and proud person and I was struggling with my identity, I still changed his mind about queer folks. And that was a really cool thing to hear.
So at that point in your life, what did you see as your future? Did you see someday being cured and you would marry a woman and have kids and lead the heteronormative perfect lifestyle?
100%. So like my attractions hadn't gone away, but I was so dedicated to my faith that I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to become a missionary. And so to prove to the Lord that I am one of his people, because I also referred to God as a boy at the time too. I found about this thing called the World Race, which is an 11-month, 11-country mission trip. And I raised $15,000 and decided to go gallivanting around the world and serving people. And there were a lot of really beautiful moments that happened. I have like my own like feelings about mission work and missions organizations and, you know, what our motivation is for going out into the world. But like at the time, it felt like my calling. I needed to prove to myself that I loved God enough. And I also was looking for a miracle because I read these blogs and stories of people who experience like full-blown supernatural miracles on the mission field, like blind eyes opened and people being healed. And I'm just like, I don't need blind eyes open. I don't need my legs to like be fixed. I just need this like thing inside me to be switched over to the right thing.
So this was after you graduated that you went?
I left 1 month after I graduated from college with a degree in music. And I went with the blessing of my church. They supported me to help raise money for me. And when I was halfway around the world, like Laos, which is right near Thailand, I was ashamed because the entire time I was hoping that like my attractions towards men would go away. And it just increased all the more. And it was like, don't think about a pink elephant.
Right.
And you're just thinking about a pink elephant. Don't think about boys, Kevin. You're thinking about boys all the time. You're noticing it. Also, in Europe, damn, them boys is fine. So like, every single moment I was awake, I was feeling like I was sinning. And so I felt super ashamed of that. And I also couldn't tell anybody because they would send me home if they found out that I was struggling with homosexuality on the field, which did happen before. And it's also, I might add, a practice that that Adventures in Missions keeps. They do not allow openly LGBTQ people to even apply for any of their programs. And if it is found out that you're on the field as an openly LGBTQ person, you're sent home. So if you want to go on this mission trip, you have to lie about who you are Or you have to tell them that you have gone to therapy for it and that you have it under control. And let me tell you what, every single queer person who has gone on that mission trip, who struggled with their homosexuality, now they're out, they are proud, and most of them are partnered with other people. And we're going back and like listening to like the things that we were taught through this program. And it's such bad theology. Like we came home with so much spiritual shit that most of us are still paying like the therapy bills for it. And I want reparations.
What year was this?
Summer of 2013, I left. January 2014, as I'm on the mission field and I can't stop looking at boys and feeling sinful about my homosexuality and my queerness, I start thinking about killing myself.
So where are you? What country are you in at that point?
I'm in Laos at the time, and I'm a team leader, and I'm trying to make it work. And I just can't do it anymore. I'm just so sad. Like I remember we went out for New Year's with the people who were staying in our hostel. And I nearly went to bed with some stranger guy that I just met that night because I got wasted. I felt so ashamed of that I decided, like, I kept thinking, I'm just like, I just want to die. I want to kill myself. I want to walk in front of a bus. I want to like get drunk and walk into the ocean. I started like making ideas and plans around these things, and so much so that it scared me. And I'm like, you know what? I don't need to be here anymore. And so I quit. And I bought a plane ticket home and left in my 7th month on the mission field. And I felt a lot of shame about that because people contributed money.
What was the blowback on that? Did you go back to your church or did you move somewhere different?
No, I went back home to my church that I was at, and I told the people who knew about my struggle, I was like, when I was on the mission field, I couldn't do it, and I needed to be around my people. And the thing about it was, like, my fear with leaving on this trip was that, like, everything at home would change without me. But what really happened was, like, when I was on the mission field, I started having all of these questions of just, like, maybe there's a different way to look at this. Maybe I've been believing different, like, because I knew queer Christians. I just didn't think that I could be a queer Christian. So it was like these things, because I had such like a fear. I saw them as backsliders, beloved backsliders, but still backsliders. As I was coming home, what I finally realized is that, like, actually at home, nothing had changed at all. Everything was still the same. I was the one who had profoundly changed, like, while being on the mission field and having to interrogate all these questions about myself. It was in all these questions, like I couldn't settle the questions in myself. And so I came to this point in my brain where I said, okay, if the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, my flesh is the problem. And if my flesh is the problem, then I'm going to end my flesh so I can stop sinning. I made a plan and I attempted to execute it, and it didn't work. Thank God.
When you were back in the United States, you did that?
Mm-hmm. I was still very attracted to boys, and I was so ashamed of myself. I was like, you know what? It's not worth it. It's not worth sinning. It's not worth, causing other people to sin. I'm not going to do it.
So what turned it all around for you?
Surviving. Surviving is what turned it around. I woke up the day after my attempted suicide, and still being there, I said, okay, God, if I am still alive, because that should have killed me, but if I am still alive, then we have to do something different, because either I need to learn how to be celibate and really like live into that calling on my life, or is there a different way to look at this? And that's the thing that really pulled me forward, was like, it's like, maybe there is a different way of looking at this, because I'm so sick of being miserable, so I need to know. And that's where I started doing my research and asking bigger questions that went beyond my church. And my church just told me to not ask these questions.
Right.
And
that's typical response.
Yeah, just believe.
Where did you start with your work? Did you start with Genesis and this whole notion of God created man and woman? Did you look at the clobber verses?
I found the Gay Christian Network, or then the Gay Christian Network website, and they had these 2 essays up there called The Great Debate, which I thought were like really poignantly written. And like for me at the time, like I read through both of them, and then I found resources like God and the Gay Christian by Matthew Vines. I've been on Twitter since like the 9th grade, when you could like text on your flip phone.
Okay.
And so I discovered like all these other queer Christians on the internet. And I'm like, okay, these people seem to be like living into something that like joyful. And like, how are they doing this? How are they? So I started asking questions and starting building these relationships. All the while that I'm like researching these things and asking these questions, I decide to move back to Georgia, or like move to Georgia, work for Adventures in Missions as an intern, and also ask God one more time to heal me, which, spoiler alert, not a thing. I started dating a woman because I figured, oh, maybe this is like just the right one, and I only need one. You only got to find one and then you're healed. That's how it works, you guys. But during the course of our relationship, I realized that I couldn't love her the way she needed to be loved. It was more like my relationship with her was more about me needing to be reassured of God's love for me. And marriage to a woman was like a sign of my healing. But I always, the entire time, had attraction towards men. And
did you have a physical relationship with her?
We kissed, we held hands, but we were good Christians, and so we never had sex.
Did you have any encounters with men while you were dating her?
No. When I was dating her, we were solid gold.
Okay.
So I got on Tinder after we broke up, and I said, you know what? If I'm going to start working through this coming out process, maybe I should go on a date with a guy. And I'd been on dates with guys before, like in secret, and felt really shameful about it. And this time I was like, you know what? I'm going to try it. So matched with this guy. He's incredibly kind, also a Christian, says the Reformation Project is coming through Atlanta. Are you going? And I was like, I didn't know anything about it. Looked it up. I emailed them. I said, hey, I have no money and I am losing my job because I'm coming out. Can I please come to your conference? Because it was kind of like, it was survival for me at that point. It was desperation. The person who had then become my best friend, Amelia Markham, called me up and said, hey, we don't have any scholarship money, but we want you to come anyways. They let me come to this conference for free, and it was at the Reformation Project in Atlanta, and this is now summer of 2015. It felt very similar to what I felt at 9 years old at Jesus Camp, where I was in a moment of worship, and I just felt the presence of God fall on me, and I just started weeping. I'm just like, this, like God is in this place. God is here with all these other queer people. Everyone is just the fullness of who they are. And it's good. And it was like after that, like it didn't matter. And that was what I was asking for the whole time. I didn't want it to be like a matter of like reading a good theology with a good argument that like convinced me. And I didn't want it to be like a powerful sermon. I wanted it to be a Holy Ghost revelation. That for me is what happened, was like I was in a space where was being affirmed in who I was, and God spoke to me in that moment. And ever since then, it's been like, all right, let's do this.
How long was it between the conference and when you started blogging about being a gay Christian?
That was summer 2015, and it wasn't until September that I wrote the blog called Today I Was Brave, in which I talked about how I came out to my mother on the phone.
Wow. So after the conference, you came out to your mother?
Came out to my mother, started coming out to a few other folks, like here and there, and at Adventures in Missions where I was working, it started getting around, and I kind of got froze out of everything. The job that was lined up for me was given to another person. The worship leading position that they were creating, I applied for that, and when I had a degree in music, I led worship for the past 2 months while I was there. I invested in there. Apparently not a good fit. Even though I was teaching other people how to sing, how to play instruments, how to create a worship set, apparently not a good enough reason to hire me. I applied to go back out into the field. They didn't think I was a good fit. I applied for the lowest position there, which is interviews on the phone, just because I this was my community. This is all that I had, and not a good fit. And I was like, okay. So I moved to Atlanta to live on my friend's floor, and I had no money and no job. I never regretted it. I was living in this shitty basement apartment with my friend Casey, who had also come back from Japan after the world race and, was also emotionally and spiritually exhausted, and also going through his own journey of reckoning with his sexuality and faith. While I was there, I finished coming out to all of the key members of my family who needed to know, and who would eventually just tell the rest of my family and cousins and all the extended folks. And then I wrote a blog and put it on the internet. I was met with a bunch of like high fives and welcome to the community. We're really glad, like blah, 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 like generally good support. And then there was a ton of, we think you're being deceived. We're praying for you. And mostly a lot of silence though. Like all of my people from my past kind of just deserted me. There's still people to this day that I haven't heard from since that day. People who like I had been to their weddings and babies and funerals and cried with, wept with, just sojournered with, that just didn't have space for me anymore.
Why do you think that being gay is such a super sin in the Christian community?
I think the reason so many people like are still holding so fast to like homosexuality and like being gay and queer or any other like identity within the LGBTQ plus cosmos is that the world has been set up for white cis heteronormativity. People have a script of how life should go, and there's a system set up to serve that.
Right, and you don't challenge it.
So if there's some, of course not. And the first thing that any system will do is preserve itself. And so for a lot of times when Christians come out as any form of queer within their context, within their churches, the first thing they're met with is the tribal mentality of, you have to think and believe the same exact way as we do. Otherwise, you can't sit with us, because if you don't think the same way, you can't be one of us. If you don't believe the same way, you can't be one of us. It's a really, really small version of God. I think it comes from a fear of being wrong, really. Like the way I've described it before is that when you start challenging a faith, like especially like something as fragile as evangelicalism, it's like the faith is built out of a house of cards, and every single card is like there's like very precise theology that explains God and like helps us understand God, and like there's no other way to look at it except for this. When you go in and you challenge that house of cards theology and you start poking at the one that's labeled LGBTQ, you threaten the whole freaking system. You threaten the whole thing, because if they're wrong about this one thing, the whole of their theology, the whole of their belief system, and the whole of their identity can come crashing down. And that is terrifying to people.
I think that's what people don't want to do, because if you say you're wrong, then you have to own the damage that you've caused other people. Mm-hmm. And can you imagine taking responsibility for all the suicides that happen in our community, all of the attempted suicide, all the homelessness, all the tragedies and things that gay people have to go through just to survive?
Yeah. Not to mention like the mental health issues incurred, not to mention the discrimination that trans people face.
Right.
And then like you want to add like race on top of that, queer people of color, like they have a whole nother set of issues that they have to deal with because of the color of their skin.
Right.
So many people are just like, well, I'm not mean to gay people. I love my gay friends. I'm really nice to my gay friends. Sure, you're nice, you're kind, you're sweet, but your sweetness is not going to end LGBTQ youth homelessness. Your solidarity might.
Right, right.
You know, the discrimination that we're feeling where we're seeing people being kicked out of churches. You have a role to play in that. And I think the other thing that comes to mind for me is that there is an act of repentance that needs to happen for so many. Like, it's not so much about just being kind or being nice or just like apologizing for adopting a non-affirming policy in your church context. I don't really want people's apologies for doing the wrong thing if they're not really going to change, because your apology just says, I'm sorry that I'm hurting you and I'm going to keep hurting you. What we need from people, nice, meaning white, moderate people for the most part, we need repentance. We need people to look at the lives of LGBTQ people, see the damage that's happening, and ask God, why is this happening? Oh, is it because of a systematic problem that I inherited? Yeah. And it's not necessarily any one person's fault. It is a system that we were born into. And if we're in a system and we recognize it, it is then our responsibility to be critical of that system and ask, where is God moving in it? How is God calling me out of the system and into a wilderness to be with the people of God? And how, on a daily basis, can I help dismantle the systems that are causing oppression in marginalized identities?
Now, Kevin, a question I like to ask all my guests, and I'm going to frame it a little differently because of our discussion today. What do you think our straight allies, people who attend these conservative, evangelical, non-affirming churches, what can they do to help the LGBTQIA plus community, given that one of the main problems is as soon as they open their mouths on this, they may just get kicked out of their church?
For straight allies or people seeking to be allies to the LGBTQ community is to be prepared to suffer the same consequences as queer people with radical solidarity. And what radical solidarity looks like, in my opinion, is I'm going to stand up, I'm going to make my voice heard in rooms where queer people can't even enter. Whether it's the elders boardroom, at the general meeting of the church, in meetings with your pastor, being very vocal about these things, about like your concerns, whether it's theologically or socially, like standing up, because like I cannot get in some rooms. We cannot be in certain rooms because our voices will not be heard. So in rooms where we cannot enter those rooms and start raising some hell. That's also going to mean if they say you can't sit with us anymore, fine, so be it. I think about the story where Jesus said, if you want to follow me, take up your cross. That is what it looks like. I think the second thing that people can do is when they're able to hand the microphone to an LGBTQ person of faith so that they can speak for themselves, let us do that. Because I think a lot of time there's a lot of performative allyship where people are super cool with queer folks. They're super cool with, and like they have gay friends. They probably have lost a lot in their own solidarity, but they also monopolize the conversation. Straight white cis pastors are really guilty of this a lot. Is like LGBTQ issues become like the forefront of their ministry and trying to create justice oriented spaces, but they don't do it in tandem with LGBTQ people. And that's problematic.
Does it because they're not talking with people in the community? They just think they know what's best and how things need to proceed? Or why do you think that is?
I think it's just they don't know any better. So if the world is built for white cis straight dudes, like of course they think that they can just like walk into a room and like be the center of attention. That's what they've been told their entire life. And I think that it is really important for the more privilege you have to really examine your privilege, check your privilege and say, okay, am I centering myself or am I centering the community that I want to stand in solidarity with? And for queer folks who are looking to build bridges with non-affirming communities, non-affirming pastors, whatever, it is an emotionally taxing job. It's emotionally taxing work. It is spiritually taxing. And so building up practices of self-care is incredibly important. I think being a part of communities that affirm who you are, for who you are, not in spite of who you are, is incredibly important. Taking your space from religious communities who are non-affirming is important so that you can end up not hating the church if that is your end goal, to help the church become more inclusive. And I think it takes being willing to have your heart broken over and over and over again. Because like that, at the end of the day, like we're at a time in history where LGBTQ people are more accepted than ever, but there's still a whole community and a whole church out there that doesn't feel the same way. My concern is, and this is where I'm probably going to get a little emotional, is that like God loves every single person in those non-affirming spaces. And God wants those people to experience the same freedom that I have experienced since coming out. Like, I fully believe that those folks don't know how free they are to love. I fully believe those people are capable of stepping into the fullness of who God created them to be and not be afraid of God. And that's what keeps me going, is that like not just to have to create spaces for queer folks and marginalized identities, and that will always be a priority for my work. But I also I want my mother to feel free to love me and love my partner and love my friends fully and completely without worried about it. I want my cousins who are like all pastors to want to come to my wedding, because not because they're obligated because they're family, but because they want to celebrate the love that I found.
It's such an incredible journey, Kevin. And I'm curious how much your faith is different now than it was back when you were struggling. Because I know that when I was trying to pray away the gay, I tried to get as close to God as I could. But honestly, I felt some resentment because I didn't feel like he was upholding his part of the deal. I thought the deal was, hey, I'll do all these things, but you got to heal me. And God had a very different plan. And when I recognized his plan for my life and realized I could be gay and Christian. Wow, that relationship with God, with Christ, absolutely transformed, and I finally knew that fullness that God has.
Yes. I think it's very similar. Like, that was my relationship with God, was very transactional. It was like, I'm going to do this because I know it's the right thing to do, and you have to do this so that I can live into the fullness of who I was created to be as a straight person, quote unquote. Right. And when I finally came out, it was like wanting, like the entire time, like when I was trying to become straight and try to fix my sexual orientation and gender identity, I was trying to get close to God. And on the flip side of that, after coming out of the closet, after finally experiencing another level of God's love for me, I realized that there is nothing I can do in my entire life to be apart from God. There's nothing, I believe, that neither height nor depth, nor angels, nor demons, no powers or principalities, nor sickness, nor Republican, nor Democrat, nor Southern Baptist, nor evangelical, nor gay, nor straight, nor cis, nor trans, nor HIV positive or negative, like, that can keep me from the love of God in Christ Jesus. It is an inseparable part of who we are and who we are created to be. Even in the moments when we feel so far from God, God is in the midst of the suffering. Mm-hmm. God is inside the breath that we're breathing into our lungs. God is the air in our lungs. He is deeply, intrinsically a part of our created nature. The atoms that make up the cells in our fingernails, the dirt on our feet, the sweat on our brow. God is all of those things and in all of those things. And there's nothing that we can do to be apart from God, even if we wanted to. And my entire existence now, my faith is now, how do I become more aware of that true reality? How do I wake up to the fact that God is in me and through me and all around me? How do I continue to stop distracting myself from God? That's my faith now, is how do I wake up to that reality?
I think you'll have to listen to this podcast after you get through seminary and write down this little bit that you had at the end, because it's such a powerful sermon. You're going to be such an awesome preacher. Kevin, I have had such a great time in our conversation today. I know people are going to want to get in touch with you and find out more about you and your work. How should they do that?
Best place to reach me, you can find me online at thekevingarcia.com. That's THE kevingarcia.com. And from there, you can connect with me through my social media, which is at the Kevin Garcia across most platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, on YouTube. I'm youtube.com/hello. I'm Kevin. So just hello, I'm KEVN. I'm also available for speaking gigs and doing workshops wherever and all that. You can reach me through the blog. And yeah, I'm happy to connect with all the humans doing all the things, because I feel this is it's a kind of a small world, and I like getting to know people. So feel free to shoot me an email.
I have to put in a plug here for your website. It is a fantastic resource. You've got great blogs and videos and podcasts. I go on there and sometimes find 20, 30 minutes, an hour later, I'm still on there. So I have to sort of limit my time with your website because there's so much great stuff on there.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And thank you for having me on. I had a really great time.
Oh, thank you so much, Kevin. Have a wonderful day.
I will. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Be the Bridge. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love a positive rating and review on iTunes. I appreciate your support and feedback. For more details, visit brianpaytonjoyner.com or follow me on Facebook or Twitter. The links are in the show notes. Have a great week. And as my grandpa used to say, if you live life by your own rules, you're gonna be okay.